The girl appeared at his fence line just after dawn, when the light was still grey and the world hadn't yet decided what kind of day it would be. Samuel Cord saw her from the porch. She stood motionless on the far side of the wire, small and dark against the open prairie, her dress torn at the hem, her hair loose and tangled. She wasn't looking at the house. She was looking back the way she'd come. He set his coffee down and walked toward her, boots crunching through the frost-brittle grass. She didn't turn until he was 10 feet away. Her face was young, maybe 16, maybe less, but her eyes were older. There was dirt on her cheek, a bruise along her jaw, and her hands were shaking. "You hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, but her lips pressed together like she was holding something in. "You run from someone." This time she nodded. Samuel looked past her, scanning the horizon. Nothing moved. The prairie stretched flat and empty, broken only by low hills and the dark line of cottonwoods that marked the creek. But he'd lived long enough to know that empty didn't mean safe. "How many?" "5, she whispered. "They close." "I don't know," her voice cracked. "I ran all night." Samuel studied her for a moment longer, then stepped forward and opened the gate. "Come on." She hesitated, her eyes flicking to the house, then back to the open land behind her. "You stay out here, they'll find you," he said quietly. "You come in, maybe they won't." She stepped through. He closed the gate behind her and led her toward the house. She walked close to him, her breath coming fast and shallow. When they reached the porch, he gestured to the door. "Go inside. There's water on the stove and bread in the tin. Eat if you want." She looked at him, uncertain. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, "but I need to see if anyone's coming." She nodded and slipped inside. Samuel stayed on the porch, his hand resting on the post, his eyes on the horizon. The sun was climbing now, turning the sky pale and cold. The wind moved through the grass in long, slow waves. He didn't know her name or where she'd come from or what she'd done to make 5 men chase her through the night. But he knew what it looked like when someone was running for their life. And he knew what it meant when men rode in numbers. Inside, the girl stood near the stove, her arms wrapped around herself. The house was small, 1 room for living, 1 for sleeping, a loft above for storage. The walls were bare wood, the floor unvarnished. There was a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner. Everything was clean and spare, like a man who didn't expect company. She poured water into a tin cup and drank it slowly, her hands still trembling. Then she tore a piece of bread from the loaf and ate without tasting it. Through the window, she could see the rancher standing on the porch, unmoving, his gaze fixed on the distance. He was tall and lean, his face weathered and hard, his hair graying at the temples. He wore a wool shirt and denim pants, a gun belt strapped low on his hip. She didn't know why he'd let her in, didn't know if he'd let her stay. But she knew she couldn't run anymore. Samuel came back inside an hour later. The girl was sitting at the table, the cup empty in front of her. "See anything?" she asked. "Not yet." He crossed to the stove and poured himself coffee, then leaned against the counter, watching her. "What's your name?" "Eliza." "Where you from, Eliza?" She hesitated. "A camp south of here, near the river." "What kind of camp?" "Prospectors, traders, drifters." She looked down at her hands. "My father brought us there after my mother died. He said it was temporary." "Where's your father now?" Her throat worked. "Dead 2 weeks ago. A man shot him over a card game." Samuel said nothing. "After that, the men in the campi," she stopped, her jaw tightening. "They said I owed my father's debts, said I had to work them off." "Work them off how?" She didn't answer, but the bruise on her jaw spoke for her. Samuel set his cup down slowly. "The 5 men who are after you, they from the camp." "Yes." "They the ones who hurt you." "One of them," her voice was barely audible. "I fought him, broke a bottle over his head, then I ran." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he straightened and walked to the door, checking the horizon again. They'll come, he said. Men like that don't let things go. I know. He turned back to her. You got anywhere else to go? She shook her head. Family, friends. No one. Samuel looked at her, this girl with dirt on her face and fear in her eyes, and felt something old and familiar settle in his chest. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. All right, he said, you can stay till they pass through, but if they come here, you do exactly what I say, understand? Eliza nodded. Say it. I'll do what you say. Good. He crossed to the corner and pulled a rifle down from the wall, checked the chamber, set it by the door. Then he sat down at the table across from her. Now tell me everything you know about these men. And she did. By midday, the sky had turned a hard, brittle blue, and the wind carried the faint smell of dust and distance. Samuel worked in the barn, repairing a bridle, while Eliza sat on a crate near the door, watching the road. She hadn't said much since the morning, but he could feel her tension like a wire pulled taut. You ever shoot a gun? He asked without looking up. No. You ever see someone die? She was quiet for a moment. My father. Samuel nodded and kept working, his hands steady on the leather. If they come, it's going to get loud and it's going to get fast. You stay behind me no matter what. You don't run, you don't scream, you don't freeze, you hear me. I hear you. You think you can do that? She met his eyes. Yes. He believed her. They came just after 2. Eliza saw them first, 5 riders moving slow across the plain, their shapes dark and deliberate against the pale grass. She didn't say anything. She just stood and looked at Samuel. He was already on his feet. Inside, he said quietly. They moved quickly into the house. Samuel closed the door and went to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see. The riders were still a half-mile out, coming straight for the ranch. They know you're here, he said. How? Doesn't matter, they're coming. Eliza's breath quickened. What do we do? Samuel turned from the window and looked at her, really looked at her. She was just a girl, scared and alone, and running from men who had already taken everything from her. He could send her out, tell her to walk toward them, tell them she'd leave peacefully, tell them whatever they wanted to hear. Maybe they'd take her and go. Maybe they'd leave him out of it. But he knew they wouldn't. And he knew what they'd do to her. You stay behind me, he said, no matter what happens. What are you going to do? What I have to. He checked his revolver, then picked up the rifle and walked to the door. Eliza followed. Samuel, stay close. He stepped out onto the porch, and she moved behind him, her hand gripping the back of his shirt. The riders were close now, maybe 100 yards, their faces visible beneath the brims of their hats. They spread out as they approached, forming a loose line across the yard. Samuel stood still, the rifle resting in his hands. The man in the center, tall and broad-shouldered, with a scar running down his left cheek, reined his horse to a stop and leaned forward in the saddle. That's far enough, Samuel called. The man grinned. We're not here for you, old man. We are here for the girl. She's not going anywhere. The man's grin faded. You don't know what you're stepping into. I know exactly what I'm stepping into. The man to the left, younger, with a crooked nose and a smirk, spat into the dirt. She ran from a debt, mister. That makes her a thief. She doesn't owe you anything. That's not for you to decide. Samuel's voice didn't rise, but it cut through the air like a blade. It is now. The scarred man leaned back in his saddle, his eyes narrowing. You really want to die for some runaway whore? Behind Samuel, Eliza flinched. Samuel didn't move. Last chance, turn around and ride out. The scarred man laughed low and ugly. You're one man, old-timer, there's 5 of us. I know. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind moved through the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a crow called. Then the scarred man's hand moved toward his gun, and Samuel shot him through the chest. The sound of the shot cracked across the yard like thunder, and the scarred man jerked backward in his saddle, his eyes wide with shock. He swayed for a moment, blood blooming dark across his shirt, then toppled sideways and hit the ground hard. The other 4 men froze. Samuel levered another round into the chamber, the rifle still raised. Next one who moves gets the same. For a heartbeat, no one did anything. Then the man with the crooked nose yanked his pistol free and fired. The bullet tore through the air past Samuel's head, splintering the doorframe behind him. He didn't flinch. He swung the rifle toward the shooter and fired again. The man screamed and clutched his shoulder, his gun falling into the dirt as he slumped forward over his horse's neck. The remaining 3 scattered, spurring their horses to the left and right, circling wide around the house. Samuel stepped back, pulling Eliza with him. "Stay low," he said. She crouched behind the porch rail, her hands pressed flat against the wood, her breath coming in short gasps. Samuel moved to the edge of the porch, tracking the riders as they split up, 2 going left, 1 going right. The one on the right was closest, a lean man with a dark beard and a rifle of his own. He raised it and fired. The bullet punched into the post beside Samuel's head, and he dropped to one knee, leveling. His own rifle. He waited until the rider came around the corner of the barn, then squeezed the trigger. The man jerked and fell, hitting the ground in a cloud of dust. 3 left. Inside the house, Eliza pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering. She could hear the gunfire outside, sharp and sudden, each shot like a door slamming shut. She didn't know how many men were left, didn't know if Samuel was hurt. She crawled to the window and looked out. One of the riders was circling toward the back of the house, his gun drawn. She opened her mouth to shout a warning, but Samuel was already moving, stepping off the porch and walking toward the barn with the rifle raised. The rider saw him and fired twice. Samuel dove behind a water trough, the bullets sparking off the metal. He came up fast, aimed and fired. The rider's horse reared, and the man fell backward, hitting the ground hard. He didn't get up. 2 left. The last 2 men regrouped near the fence line, their horses stamping and snorting. One of them, a heavy man with a thick mustache, shouted across the yard. "You're a dead man, you hear me? You're a dead man." Samuel stepped out from behind the trough, reloading as he walked. "Then come finish it." The heavy man cursed and spurred his horse forward, his pistol blazing. Bullets kicked up dirt around Samuel's feet, but he kept walking, calm and steady, the rifle rising to his shoulder. He fired once. The heavy man jerked sideways and tumbled off his horse, landing in a heap. The last man, young, maybe 20, with wide eyes and trembling hands, stared at Samuel from across the yard. His gun was still holstered. He hadn't fired a single shot. "Don't," Samuel said quietly. The young man's hand hovered over his pistol. "Don't." For a long moment, they stood there, the wind moving between them. Then the young man pulled his gun. Samuel shot him through the heart. Silence settled over the ranch like a blanket. The horses wandered aimlessly, reins dragging in the dirt. 5 bodies lay scattered across the yard, blood soaking into the dry earth. Samuel lowered the rifle and stood there, his chest rising and falling, his hands steady. Behind him, Eliza stepped off the porch, her face pale. She looked at the bodies, then at Samuel. "Are they all dead?" "Yes." She wrapped her arms around herself, trembling. "You killed them all." "I did." She didn't say anything else. She just stood there, staring at the ground. Samuel walked to the nearest body, the scarred man, and checked his pockets. He found a folded piece of paper and a small leather pouch of coins. He pocketed the coins and unfolded the paper. It was a crude map, marked with the location of the camp Eliza had described. He looked at it for a long moment, then folded it again and put it away. "Come on," he said, "let's get these horses tied up." Eliza nodded, wiping her eyes, and followed him. They buried the bodies at dusk, in a shallow trench beyond the fence line where the ground was soft. Samuel worked in silence, his shovel biting into the earth with steady, mechanical rhythm. Eliza helped where she could, dragging stones to mark the grave, her hands blistered and sore. When it was done, Samuel stood over the mound, his hat in his hands, his face shadowed in the fading light. "You want to say something?" he asked. Eliza shook her head. "They don't deserve words." He nodded and put his hat back on. They walked back to the house together, the sky turning purple and gold behind them. The horses were tied in the barn, the yard swept clean of blood and spent shells. It looked almost peaceful. Inside, Samuel lit a lamp and set it on the table. Eliza sat down heavily, her shoulders sagging, her eyes hollow. "You all right?" he asked. "I don't know." He poured water into a basin and handed her a cloth. "Clean yourself up, I'll make food." She took the cloth and wiped her face, her hands, the dirt and blood and fear washing away in slow, careful strokes. When she was done, she set the cloth aside and looked at him. "Why did you do it?" Samuel was slicing bread at the counter. He didn't look up. "Do what?" "Kill them. You didn't know me. You didn't owe me anything." He was quiet for a moment, then set the knife down. "I knew enough." "That's not an answer." He turned to face her. "A long time ago, I had a daughter. She was about your age when she died." Eliza's breath caught. "She got sick, fever. I rode 2 days to find a doctor, but by the time I got back, she was gone." His voice was steady, but his eyes were distant. "I couldn't save her, but I could save you." Eliza's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." He turned back to the counter. "You didn't do anything wrong." They ate in silence, bread and beans and weak coffee. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. The lamp flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. When they were done, Samuel stood and walked to the window, looking out into the dark. "What happens now?" Eliza asked. "You stay here tonight. Tomorrow I'll take you to town. There's a woman there runs a boarding house. She'll take you in. And then you start over." Eliza looked down at her hands. "What if I can't?" Samuel turned to her. "You already did. You ran, you fought, you survived. That's more than most people ever do." She blinked, her eyes shining. "I don't even know how to thank you." "You don't need to." She stood and crossed to him, and for a moment she just looked at him, this hard, quiet man who had killed 5 men without hesitation, who had buried them without ceremony, who had given her a second chance without asking for anything in return. Then she hugged him. Samuel stiffened, surprised, then slowly, carefully, he put his arms around her. "You're going to be all right," he said quietly. And for the first time in weeks, Eliza believed it. They left at first light. Samuel saddled 2 horses and loaded a pack with supplies, bread, dried meat, a canteen of water. Eliza wore a clean dress he'd found in the loft, one that had belonged to his daughter, kept all these years in a trunk he rarely opened. She didn't ask about it. She just put it on and rolled the sleeves up to fit. The ride to town took most of the morning. The prairie stretched wide and golden under the sun, the sky clear and endless. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. When the buildings of the town came into view, low and wooden, clustered around a dusty main street, Samuel slowed his horse. "You ever been here before?" he asked. "No. It's small, but it's decent. People mind their own business." Eliza nodded, her hands gripping the reins. They rode in slowly, past the general store, the blacksmith, the saloon. A few people looked up as they passed, their eyes curious but not unkind. Samuel tipped his hat to an older woman sweeping her porch, and she nodded back. He stopped in front of a 2-story house near the edge of town, painted white with green shutters and a sign that read, "Rooms for rent, Mrs. Abigail Carter, proprietor." Samuel dismounted and helped Eliza down. "Wait here," he said, and walked up to the door. A woman answered, tall and grey-haired, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. Samuel spoke to her quietly, and after a moment she looked past him at Eliza. Then she nodded. Samuel came back down the steps. She'll take you in. You'll work in exchange for room and board, cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. It's honest work. Eliza looked at the house, then back at him. What if she doesn't like me? She will. How do you know? Because I told her, you're a fighter. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to do this. Yes, you do. He put a hand on her shoulder. You just keep going, one day at a time. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Mrs. Carter came down the steps, drying her hands on her apron. Come on, girl, let's get you settled. Eliza looked at Samuel one last time. Will I see you again? Maybe, he smiled just a little. If you need me, I'll be at the ranch. She hugged him again, quick and tight, then turned and walked toward the house. Samuel watched her go, watched her climb the steps and disappear inside. Then he mounted his horse and rode back the way he'd come. Years later, when people asked Eliza about the rancher who'd saved her life, she would smile and say, he was a good man, the kind the West doesn't make anymore. She never went back to the camp by the river. She never saw the men who'd chased her. She worked hard, saved her money, and eventually opened a small shop in town, a place where women could buy fabric and thread and feel safe. She married a blacksmith, had 2 children, and lived a long, quiet life. But every year, on the anniversary of that day, she would ride out to the ranch with a basket of food and leave it on the porch. Sometimes Samuel would be there to greet her, sometimes he wouldn't. But the basket was always empty by the time she came back. Samuel lived the rest of his days on the ranch, working the land, tending his horses, and keeping to himself. He never spoke of the 5 men he'd killed, and the law never came asking. The map he'd taken from the scarred man, he burned. The coins he gave to Eliza. And the memory of his daughter, her laughter, her smile, the way she used to run through the grass with her arms wide, he carried with him until the day he died. Some men are remembered for the towns they built or the gold they found. Samuel Cord was remembered for something simpler. He stood between a frightened girl and 5 men who meant her harm. And when she obeyed his order, when she got behind him, he kept his promise. He killed them all.